All right. Good morning, everyone. We're going to go ahead and kick off for everyone who has joined so far. My name is Nicole Donaldson. I'm with the Central Florida Foundation. I'm the Vice President of Philanthropic Strategies and Partnerships. Today, we have an awesome panel. We're going to be discussing the role of philanthropy in journalism, and we're so grateful for the time that everyone has given today for this discussion. Just a housekeeping rule. Or not a rule so much as a suggestion. If throughout any point in time, as you're listening, you have a question, feel free to utilize the Q&A at the bottom of your screen and submit any questions that you may have for any of our panelists. They may attempt to respond throughout, or we'll aim to tackle some of those questions as we get towards the end of the discussion. But we appreciate your interaction and feedback. At this time, I'm going to hand it over to Mark Brewer, President and CEO of the Central Florida Foundation.
Thanks, Nicole, and good morning, everyone. So we're starting a series of community conversations attaching journalism to other things in life where there are natural connections, and our first is philanthropy and journalism. And I think it's fair to say that journalism and philanthropy fit together kind of like two parallel lanes on the highway. In philanthropy, we depend on citizens in the community to be connected through the democracy to the communities they live in and to make investments both intellectually and monetarily to the things that matter to them, to support those missions that make quality of life in the region what we want it to be. But you can't really have democracy without the fourth estate. So journalism is primarily responsible for all of us being connected to the things we need to know and how we know about them. And so today we're going to explore both sides of that piece and look at ways that philanthropy can play more roles in journalism and vice versa. And we have a great panel today. So I want to start by just introducing you to who's around the table this morning. She's the president and general manager at WMFE, which is a nonprofit public media organization serving 9 counties. She's a tenured journalist and serves on the board of the Florida Public Media. Please welcome Judith Smelser. Judith, welcome.
Morning. Thank you. Thanks for having me.
She's the editor-in-chief of 2 of Florida's largest daily newspapers, the Orlando Sentinel and the Fort Lauderdale Sun Sentinel. She's a native of the city Beautiful and started her career as a reporter 35 years ago. Join me in welcoming Julie Anderson.
Thanks for having me, Mark.
She's the editor-in-chief of the Oviedo Community News. Her 15 years as a community journalist include time at the East Orlando Sun, the Seminole Voice, the Winter Park Maitland Observer, and Orlando Magazine. Say hello to Megan Stokes.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Hi, Megan. Good to have you here. He's the managing director of, and publisher, I should say, of Public News Service. His career includes leadership positions at public policy and advocacy organizations. Welcome, Joshua Wise. Good morning, Josh.
Thanks for having me.
Good to have you here. We will also, I believe, have one additional panel member who you will also recognize when you see her. She's having some technical difficulties, but I'll let you know that you'll know her as the morning person at Spectrum News 13. She's been in Orlando since 1981 and as a UCF grad at Spectrum News 13. She's worked her way from assignment editor to her current anchor in the morning position, and that is Ybeth Bruzual. And I think she will be joining us shortly if she can get through her technical issues. So we're going to go ahead and get started this morning, and I want to start at the higher level because we have journalists around the table today that have worked not probably at the beginning of this transition, through the transition, and are now trying to figure out what's happening next. I'm going to talk a little bit about the kind of changing marketplace for journalism. And I'd really love to hear from the perspective of the folks around the table what that looks like for people who in many cases don't really understand journalism. They don't know where the stuff comes from. They just know they go someplace and they get it. And they're happy about that, but they may not be thinking about what their role in getting news is and what your role in getting news is. So Julie, I'd love to start with you because leading 2 major newspaper, content of 2 major newspapers in Florida, your marketplace for daily newspapers has changed dramatically over the last 10 or 12 years.
Right. So when I started in the business, there was no internet. So, we in print, we worked in a newsroom at the Orlando Sentinel, actually, with over 300 journalists. And, we were assigned, we covered every city government, anything that moved, we covered in Orlando. And, as the internet brought on more competitors and basically moved our business model from advertising to subscriptions, and basically revenue moved from traditional media to Google and Facebook, it really dramatically changed the resources that we have to work with. But the basics of journalism haven't changed. We still go out and we report. We rely heavily on public records, which in Florida is pretty open compared to other states. And so I'd say the basics haven't changed, but the sources of information that people get their information from has changed dramatically, because it's not just media that they're getting it from, or the press. It's really from anybody on Facebook or Instagram or any social platform can profess to be a journalist and supply information, and so that's who we're competing with. So that's different.
A lot of do-it-yourself journalism out there, definitely. Megan, you're at the ground level, really, in a community where you may be the prime provider of important information to people in a small geographic area. What does your audience look like, and what do they expect from you?
Yes, we started our organization by listening to the community first. We spent about 9 months surveying our community, asking them what kind of information they needed, where the information gaps were, how they like to get information. And we were pretty surprised when we found out that the majority of them were getting their information from Facebook and from word of mouth. So we also asked what kind of information they wanted, and the majority said they wanted information about growth and development. They wanted information about city government. Basically, they wanted to know, I think, what their elected officials were deciding on their behalf. And so that's where we started. That's where we really dug in. Is we've attended, I think it's something like 350 hours of city government meetings since we launched less than 2 years ago. And people have told us that they felt more connected to their community because of that. It's really important for them to know that information.
I want to stop for a second and welcome Ybeth. Ybeth, we introduced you while you were busy trying to figure out how to get through the tunnel, and I'm glad you found your way. Welcome. It's good to have you here today.
Thank you, Mark.
Judith, I was thinking while Megan was talking about that age-old journalistic chore of going to city and county commission meetings and sitting through the whole meeting. Over 9 counties, that's a lot of commission meetings to go to. How do you guys approach that situation?
Right, and I'm sure Julie feels that pressure too. We cannot possibly do that. We have a newsroom right now of 7 people. That sounds perhaps small, but when I was leading the newsroom here, which that's part of my story, this is my second time around here at WMFE, and I was the news director here for a while. And when I left, I think we had a staff of 3 or 4. So while we aren't large at this point, we're large for public media and we're growing. I mean, we will have 10 journalists by the end of next month and a dozen by the end of the year, and plans to expand farther. But that still doesn't mean we can cover every city council meeting, and so we are thinking about things like how, just like what Megan was saying. I mean, I think one of the interesting changes that I've seen over my time in the field is our changing relationships with our communities and with our audiences. Traditionally, we've been very good at telling the audience what we think they need to know. we've not been so good at asking and listening to what they actually need to know and how they want to receive that information. And so when we sort of did a mission and vision and a strategic plan refresh last year, we talked a lot about this, is really making it intentional and an intentional effort and making it actually someone's job to go out and listen to the community and try to find out those things across a 9-county region that we haven't done frankly a good enough job of doing over the past 40 years. That's not easy, and it's certainly resource heavy, but it's something that we've realized that as we've also seen, unfortunately, trust in news and journalism go down. That's the way to regain it. If people want to be listened to, go figure. And people want to see themselves and their priorities reflected in the news sources that they rely on, and we want to be part of that.
Josh, what's the role of public news service here?
Well, public news service is a newswire. Our stories are distributed to stations across the state, and so our first audience is the news directors at the stations, who have to make the decision, why should I be airing this story today? And I will echo what Judith and others have just said, is that, they're trying to serve audiences as well, and they're trying to listen to their audiences and provide value. And so it's our job to provide them with something they think is valuable to the audiences that they're trying to serve. I will say for myself, as a voracious consumer of news, one thing I have to remind myself of consistently is that I'm not my own audience. And that the stuff that I would love for us to be reporting on and putting out on a daily basis isn't necessarily the thing that's going to best serve the community. And it's really important, again, to keep your ears open, your eyes open to what people are actually telling you. And, honestly, for us, we're tracking, the outlets that are using our content, and what, so we need to go see, well, what is it that's actually doing well with these these stations we're trying to serve? What is it that they're taking? Well, maybe we should do more of that.
Ybeth, Spectrum News 13 has a very kind of local community feel to it in your reporting and the way you approach things. What's the strategy there in terms of serving the audience and what they might want to hear more from you about?
Well, I'll be honest with you, the strategy, I think we're all still trying to figure it out. It's an everyday process, but the way that I see it, I've been here for quite a while. We're news on people's schedule. We're not designed to be watched for more than 30 minutes. Why? Nobody runs home to watch the 5 o'clock news. We're going to sit down over the dinner table. I wish we did. At 6 o'clock or whatever, we don't. So when they come up with this, 25 years ago now, it's the wheel. So it's 30 minutes, bottom, top, and you just dip in whenever you want. Florida weather every 10 minutes. I mean, things are so ever fluid and changing in this world. I may not be here tomorrow. I don't know. I'm here now.
Right.
My badge works, but and I only say that because I want to follow it up with this. Even if I was not here tomorrow or next week, I would still say the following. It's 24-hour news. It's local. You don't have to go to Jeopardy or whatever. I mean, we have the luxury as a journalist that as a local journalist, local, if something's happening with former President Trump or whatever, like we break in, we don't have to wait for national news desk, which we have. We can do it our own. That's a big responsibility. Something else that I think is really attractive, we're allowed to kind of just float around. I mean, I was the former assignment editor here, for God's sakes. The assignment editor, overnights. I was planning editor, I was editor, I was cutting video, and now somehow they let the door open and I'm in front of the camera. They let us do these things. I think in your traditional newsroom, you do one thing and you stay in that role and that's it. Here we just kind of we float around. But the app, social media, whatever, like Joshua was saying, what we think we should be telling people, but it's really now reversed. Like what do they want to hear from us? and we mix that in. We also do these things called listening tours that my news director, Susan Diastoli, started a while back. No cameras. You don't have the day off. You're just going to go with somebody else in the newsroom. You get in a car and just pick a neighborhood and just go talk for your 8. Sorry, there's like a bug flying around. You just go talk to the neighborhood for 8 hours. An Indian neighborhood. I'm Hispanic, so I've got that part covered, I think, rather well. I'm so proud of covering our community. But go to an Indian neighborhood by the Florida Mall. Go to different neighborhoods and just talk. Literally, we just sit and talk. And so you build relationships. So whenever you know what hits the fan, and we need to talk to folks, then they trust us to talk to them in good times and in not so good times.
So do all of you, or do any of you, think about civic engagement as part of what you do? Is that something that's in your mind? And what role does that play for the work you do?
Absolutely, we do. It's written into our new vision statement that we lead the community conversation with substantiated facts and respect for diverse perspectives. We see ourselves as a convener, and that's been impossible to do at some point during the pandemic, nearly impossible. You all did a great job of it, Mark, by launching these conversations, and our organization did some of it virtually as well. But it's very difficult to do. We're now getting back into the community and finding there is so much pent-up demand for that kind of convening, and I think, when you look at the research into the impact of local journalism, you see the effect of the availability of local news having a direct impact on civic engagement, having a direct impact on everything from people joining PTAs to voter turnout, to voting in local elections, down ballot voting, to local candidates running for office. The number of candidates running for office increases when there's availability of local news. So, I think, yes, we see that very much as a part of our role. We need to be not only having conversations on the air and on our website and on our app and in the ways that we talk to at maybe the community, but we need to be out in the community helping people in the community tell their own stories and talk to each other about some of these difficult conversations, and these difficult issues, and tackling how we're going to find solutions to them. So yes, very much so feel that that's part of our job.
Yeah, I would say we use social media to tap into what some of the hot button issues are. And sometimes, it may not be on our radar in the beginning, but it might be like a zoning issue or a growth and development issue, a school board issue, things like that, if we see chatter, a lot of chatter, we make sure that we're covering that and report it out because, there's one thing, which is you have a lot of chatter and sort of gossip about things, but you need a reporter to go figure out what's actually going on and reporting that out. So people have at least a basis of understanding about what the facts are. And so that's what we believe our role is, but social media actually helps us in that regard.
And for us with local elections, people told us that, it's hard to find profiles on some of these candidates, especially the super local ones, and they needed that information to be informed at the polls. So we create a voter guide every year, and one thing that we do that people seem to really find useful is we collect reader questions and we pose those to the candidates and have them respond word for word. And that way it's creating that direct line from the voter to the candidate, and thousands of people access that voter guide.
Josh, what's that look like statewide?
Well, I think I will echo the need to be putting solutions forward. I think especially, in an era where people have lost a lot of trust in institutions, to be seeing here are ways that solutions are being put forward, and here's how you can get involved in it, I think is a really important civic engagement function that journalism has. And at a very basic level, we did a lot of coverage around redistricting over the last couple of years. And the one thing that I really wanted to make sure that we did in every story, regardless if we were talking about how lines were being drawn or how communities of interest were getting involved, is that it, on some level in the story, we were telling people, and here's how to figure out where you should vote now. So that, people have that very basic information and feel like they're at least empowered on some level. And you see that in the data as well, that engagement on stories just really goes up when people feel like there's something actionable that they can do coming out of reading the story.
Right, yeah. So, in philanthropy, we focus on social capital, which is really you've got hard capital, soft capital, and social capital is when people come together and go do something. And there is no philanthropy or community engagement without social capital. Yet a lot of media divides social capital into separate, kind of like groups of armies who don't care for each other, like to fight and argue with each other. So I see that as a challenge across the board, that media has to be able to satisfy their core audiences and attract other audiences, including people that might not agree with a story you've done or something that you're working on that they see. That may be easier, Megan, at the very local level, because you've got your audience is your neighbors, right? That's which is different. You get to see them more often. It's a little more difficult statewide or around two newspapers. And I think Ybeth, you guys have done a pretty good job of just putting your people out in the community. I see them out there, and so I'm assuming that you're having lots of those conversations with people.
Yeah, we're having those conversations all the time, but never as more grassroots than ever before. And I think it has to do with the empowerment of our phone. We, the traditional way would be like, okay, I need a photog, so let's go get MOS's man on the street or whatever, or an interview. We've all been trained. I was taken off the anchor desk for a week. It's called CDS, and I've been trained. I mean, I shot on a regular camera years ago, but I'm really not off the clock, am I? Which is kind of crazy because there's a line and we've all crossed it during the pandemic. And so I will be off, but if I run into Senator Joe Schmo, state representative, the phone goes on. I put a microphone, a Rhodes microphone, and then here we go. Let me ask you this question for the show that I may need. And so we are really involved in whatever we see that we think would be of interest to our audience. There was a protest, not a manifestation. There was a gathering of Iranian Americans over there at Festival Park. It was on a Sunday. We were coming back from a UCF game. I see all the flags. There was about 300 plus people. It's a lot of people. So I said to my husband, stop the car. And, I get on my leggings with my UCF shirt and I'm recording this. So now I've eliminated the photog. I edited it on iMovie on the way home, went to bed, and it was new for that evening show in the morning. So now we're seeing things around our community. We're using the phones. The content goes on like this, on air, online. So I think we're paying attention more than ever because of the technology, and then we're putting the stuff out there faster. So we're covering a lot more issues, a lot more community members that before, I got to wait for a camera person to show up. Those days are gone. Because when you and I wake up in the morning, do we grab the remote? We grab our phones. So I have to go where the eyeballs are and just upload this video as fast as I can. And then I feel that because of the technology, the training, therefore we're able to cover more, which before maybe we could be limited. And now we seem to cover more ground, more things of interest.
I am interested in that multimedia has, you've all brushed multimedia at one time or another. There was a time earlier, Julie, when all Sentinel reporters, they did everything, right? They would do instant kind of reporting on things that they wandered across. And I sense that that's a little complicated to do at the level now with the number of people you've got. But is that something that is still a thing, especially for Judith and Julie and Josh? If you're, I don't know if you do anything other than the content providing side of what you do to deliver news to people, but I'm interested in that multimedia piece because I don't know what the demand for it is, but apparently everybody is looking at that and trying to figure it out.
Yeah, I would say everybody is trained to be not just a reporter, but also to take pictures. Some are better than others. And if we really want a great shot, we send a photographer. But we rely on, there are many reporters who can take a decent shot. So they do that. Everybody is involved in social media in terms of promoting their own stories. We used to put a lot more emphasis on video. We still to some degree, but not as much as we used to. There's only so much one person can do, honestly. You can be a great reporter and take a little bit of video, but are you going to be a sort of full-time photographer? Probably not.
Yeah, I mean, we certainly know that this is an area that we need to grow into. We talk about, we put standards in place for, I remember when I first started at WMFE, we didn't post on a website. We did audio, that was it, and so now every reporter is expected to have a photo that goes along with their story. Where that comes from might be stock, but hopefully it's something that they've taken themselves. We're starting to ask reporters to take some video, especially when there's a special project that they're working on. Let's take a little video of somebody that you're interviewing, and some of it is really relying on early adopters, frankly, to dip their toe into that water and to celebrate that when that goes well. But I think one thing that, just like what Julie referred to and alluded to, the core product is the journalism. So we can't take our eye off that ball. We have to make sure that what we're doing and our core mission is the high quality reporting. But the fact of the matter is, we have to be cognizant of how people want to receive that reporting and how people want to consume it. And so if we do great reporting and no one's paying attention because it's not in the place that people are, or it's not in the format that people want and prefer, why does it matter? So there is that balance, and we haven't figured it all out yet. And again, it's resource heavy. There's only so much one person can do. You can't, no one's a Superman or a Superwoman, you can't expect one person to turn gazillion versions of every story and not get burnt out and leave, so what's the point of that either? So it's a constant balance of the best use of very limited resources.
I would echo that, and to note that there's a really big gap, but it's a really small line between quality that's good enough for the internet and quality that's good enough for broadcast when it comes to audio and video. And a lot of people can do stuff that's good enough for the internet, but it's doing stuff that's good enough for broadcast quality is really hard. One project we've been working on more often lately is working with print outlets to turn their stories into radio. And so we will work on, training the reporters, if you're getting your source audio or doing your source interview, here's how to, turn on a recording device so that you're going to get quality that's usable on the air. And I think, multimedia is really sort of makes the case for collaboration across outlets, because I think everyone is probably going to do a little bit of everything, but everyone is also going to have the thing that they do really well. And I think it, benefits the field for us to work with each other to, play to each other's strengths and work with each other to get stories out in multi formats that way.
And Mark, if I could just explain.
Oh, sure.
When I took over as editor, I fundamentally changed our focus from, say, a lot of breaking news to more enterprise and investigative reporting. And so what that requires reporters to do is spend a lot of time digging for public records, interviewing, many people. It's a different skill set. And taking the video is really not as important. It's really, we have to deliver unique news that nobody else is doing because of the resource intensity of it. And so that's why I think we've sort of swung away, less multimedia, more sort of watchdog journalism, which requires a different skill set.
Sure, absolutely. So I want to talk for a minute about philanthropy and its connection to journalism. And so for the audience who may not know all the detail of this, some of the folks on this call are nonprofits and some are for-profits. And philanthropy has played a role in journalism since the beginning of time. Clearly, transactionally, philanthropy can fund the nonprofits around the table. Philanthropy, though, also funds all kinds of news gathering strategies and investigative strategies at some for-profit places. So with that out of the way, I'm interested from your perspective about two things around philanthropy. One, what you see philanthropy's role in journalism as being, and if you also could address just the current collaboration in the community among journalists. I wonder how much collaboration we actually have in this space right now, because philanthropy also plays a role in that space. So anybody who'd like to start.
I'd like to start. We have a group here, before I forget, we have a watchdog group too, Julie. And you're right, it's a different skill set. Like, you know, we have Curtis McLeod, who's one of our weekend anchors, but he is part of the watchdog group, and also Molly Durig. And the reason why I now pause and pivot back into your question about philanthropy is that, which is separate from the watchdog group that I just mentioned, is that she came to us from Report for America. And so she started with us and did her year, I think it was. And then, I mean, she wasn't even done. We were throwing like offers at her, not me and my bosses. We were all begging, keep her, please. Because the skills that she brings to the table from Report for America, the nonprofit group, was invaluable. She can look at a story with, not to have the same experience as some of us in this chat room. She can go toe to toe with anyone because she's that good. And she learned that through working for Report for America, I do believe, and we wouldn't have her if it wasn't for that group. And I'll have to be honest with you, guilty as charged. I had never heard of Report for America. I don't know if I was living under a rock. So when she came with us, I thought, oh my gosh, this is so fantastic. So I definitely see it firsthand how philanthropy goes hand in hand with helping create, foster, mold, journalists, solid journalists, unbiased journalism.
So
I've noticed just in the last 5 years, foundations and wealthy philanthropists have sprung up to create journalism funds. Seattle Times has probably been the leader in this. In the last dozen years, they've of course, they have a lot of corporate headquarters in Seattle, but they've started what they call news labs. Like they have a news lab to fund education, another one to fund traffic, another one to fund investigative reporting. And these I think they're mostly corporations, but they're also wealthy individuals who are funding as many as like 10 reporters in their investigative unit just to do that for Seattle. In Miami, I have much more familiarity with the Knight Foundation and the Esterman family, which is a car dealer family, have pulled together $2.5 million to fund early stage investigative reporters for the South Florida community. And Houston, I mean, all these foundations across the country are springing up to fill the gap between the dwindling resources of news media to make sure that there is more focus in the areas that they care about, whether it's education or environment or investigative reporting or whatever. And that is just, it's blossomed. I'd love for Central Florida to do that.
So
we're
going to be welcoming a Report for America core member in next month coming on board, and that's one of the new positions that we're adding to cover housing and homelessness, and that's a great example of one of these sort of relatively new national journalism funders that have been springing up to address the crisis in local news over the past 5 to 10 years. But the fact is, public media has been doing nonprofit journalism for 40, 50 years. I mean, we have been operating under a nonprofit model for decades. Almost 50% of our budget comes from individual contributions, and another 41 or 2% comes from business corporate sponsorships, corporate giving. So, nearly 90% of our budget comes from community philanthropy. Now, where we don't get as much philanthropic support is from foundations, and there's a number of reasons why that is. But I think part of it is because the gap hasn't been crossed there as far as, what is the role of a philanthropic foundation in supporting journalism? What does that look like? What's the need? And where do we fit in? And how is this similar and different to supporting an arts organization or a human service organization? And so these are some of the conversations that I've been having with people in this community since I've taken over in this role. And it's been really interesting to have these discussions. I think there's a lot of confusion, and I imagine that's where you want to go next in the conversation, Mark. But I do think that it's a really interesting. It's one of those things that sort of on the national foundation level, it feels kind of new. But we've been doing this for decades, and so we're familiar with how it works.
I really want to echo that it so we're a for-profit organization, but we do several partnerships with nonprofits. And in the conversations we've had with foundations and having done co-applications, et cetera, my real worry is that philanthropy will start treating journalism like the arts. And I've been an arts administrator in the past, and that's, in the nonprofit art scene, you're allowed to do really cool experimental stuff because your audience, you only really need to impress the one person who can write the $1 million check. And I think it's gotten better over the last couple of years of philanthropy and foundations really thinking about, okay, so who's the end user of this thing that we're creating? How are we serving those people? I mean, I think we all, and answering the first question, talked about our audience and listening to people. And I think that philanthropy has lagged a little bit, and I think part because it's, it's new to the field, but it's encouraging to see people moving in that direction, and I just hope that it keeps moving in that direction, and doesn't, become, like I said, sort of the ivory tower journalism funding that it has the potential to be if we're not careful.
I
So
think.
I'm sorry. Go ahead, Megan.
I think it's a perfect place to jump in, really, because I think that a lot of local independent publishers are coming in as nonprofits or pivoting to, fiscal sponsorships so that they can accept philanthropic dollars. Because, we all saw what happened. I come from traditional advertising-based newspapers, and, with the economic forces, we've seen them shuttered, and we see it even today across the media with, Gannett and BuzzFeed, and we see bankruptcies, we see closures. But local independent publishers have really kind of been a shining light in that space. We've seen the number of these publishers grow. We've seen their revenue grow year over year. It's a model that we adopted to diversify the revenue because, like I said, we've been there. We know what it looks like when you're relying on one thing. But I think that the most important issue to address when you're talking about philanthropy and journalism is that a lot of publishers are creating products that are like a social service. When you're listening to your audience, you're responding to their needs. And I think we saw a big movement towards that after the pandemic. People really needed local information like never before, and it wasn't there. So we saw a lot of publishers start up during that time, but also publishers that were willing to respond to local needs. And so whenever you look at it like a social service, it needs philanthropic support because local information should be a right. It shouldn't be a privilege. We need all kinds of media. We need paid media, but we also need local free media that's accessible to all. And I think we're seeing media becoming more equitable, which is so encouraging, and it needs to happen more and more.
I think the accessibility piece is a really important piece of that. It is the accessibility and also I think the incentive model, right? So the incentive as a nonprofit news organization, our incentive is to do the public good. And we are accountable to the community and no one else because of the funding structure that I just laid out. You know, I mean, our donors and our audience hold us accountable for doing the kind of public service journalism that you just described, Megan, you know, and we're not accountable to profits in any way. And I think that's it, that is really what frees us to do that, is the way our business model is structured.
So in the beginning, I started the question by saying to you that I think a lot of people don't really understand journalism or what their role should be in journalism. And this is an issue, Megan and Josh, to your points. Most of philanthropy involved with journalism is strategic philanthropy. It's specific foundations or funds or people who are focused on trying to solve for a problem or create more investigative reporters. Retail philanthropy is totally blind to journalism. And so the problem is, I would say, well, I could make a gift to you, Megan, or I could make a gift to, you know, a human services nonprofit. That seems like it would be more important. So I think to both of your points, the ability to have the general constituency of the community recognize that when they make a gift to a nonprofit journalism space, they're actually investing in their own community by doing that, as opposed to it having to be more focused in some special high dollar exercise that they have to be a rich philanthropist to participate in. Ybeth, I'm interested in News 13's kind of round the clock focus. How do you make the decisions about what kinds of community things you cover there?
It's exhausting, Mark, I'm here to tell you. It's exhausting, but it's so rewarding. Before I give you the answers to that, let me just say something which should be an asterisk, but it actually should be a headline, all bold caps, underline. I think sometimes, and I see how many people are on this event, virtual event, it's like, I don't know, 85 or something. That's a lot of people. And so I want to make sure everybody's listening to this. No one tells, like, for example, I do the morning news Monday through Friday, but then I do political coverage as well, along with other folks. We have a show, Political Connections, every Sunday at 11 a.m. and 8 p.m. But nobody in doing this, no one here, no boss has walked up to me and goes, let's not mention so-and-so, or let's go ahead and just throw so-and-so under the bus. Never. And if anybody, some producers who, you know, come in and out, we go, it's a rotating door. If they lean one way, it's like, not on my watch. I can't, I work too hard and too long to show both, all sides, because we have independents, but then we have NPAs, which is different. Republicans, Democrats, you know, so I just want to put that out there because I am not, we don't do that. We don't do that here. So then how do we gauge events around the community? We have so many people who are just out and about. We have so many journalists, which saddens my heart. I mean, I drive by every morning at 2:45, the Orlando Sentinel, and it's like, I see the tumbleweeds. It breaks my heart because I know the people that were in there, you know, gosh, Pulitzer Prize winners, all this great journalism, but it has morphed into something else. But people who've left journalism have now joined organizations. And so they know what it's like on this side. So they'll help me with information. Orlando Economic Partnership comes to mind. Jennifer Marcial Ocasio, who worked for the Orlando Sentinel and their Spanish language tier, El Sentinel, won a bunch of awards. She's now with Orlando Economic, always sending me information, stats. 1,000 people move to Florida a day, 1,000 to Central Florida a week. So former journalists are throwing things at us, information that we can now use and get stories out there. The listening tours that I told you about on social media, it's an open door. Good times and not so good. People let us know what's happening in their community. We have such a varied staff, LGBTQ+, Black, Hispanic, Asian. So everybody's just out there. And then we don't win every battle. You know, you sit there and tell between your legs when you pitch a story and it's like, we're not interested. So what I do is because either we don't have enough staff. Oh, really? Don't worry. I'll just shoot it on my phone. So then I make sure it gets covered. And then I write the web story. And then I go, hey, don't forget to put that in your 5 o'clock show. I cut the video for you. And they're like, if you make it a little bit easier, then it can be shown in multiple shows, morning, midday, evening, overnight. So then you can get it out there. But I think it can be overwhelming how many events are out there, how many communities we need to cover. Because like you said, Judith, it can make people feel burnt out because it's coming at you 24/7. But we try to get to it. And then we have our sister station on the other side of I-4, Bay News 9, who provides content to us. And in total, we have 38 Spectrum stations across the country, LA, New York. So now we're really becoming a network. So now we have more content. And, in LA, and the Asian community growing. In New York, it's such a melting pot. So we get to use that content here, which makes us happy because then it's just true variety.
So there's a trend around America, a conversion trend, where some for-profit media is converting to nonprofit media because they think that business model might work better for them. And I'm interested to know if that's an issue for anybody on the call, if you've been a part of any of those. There are a couple of newspaper conversions, Julie, around the country that have been successful, more that have not been successful, but the ones that have attracted a lot of philanthropy and a lot of people who really want to invest in local journalism. That's a trend. I'm not sure that it's a good or bad trend. It's just a trend. So I'd be interested in your thoughts on philanthropy's role in that space.
Well, there are a lot of newspapers for sale right now, a lot. I mean, Gannett, which is the largest chain of newspapers across the country, has said, because it's took on so much debt, that they're willing to sell any newspaper. So whether those papers are bought and turned into nonprofits remains to be seen. I think what's happening, what I've noticed, is a lot of families are buying the papers of their communities, and we're talking smaller papers, where if somebody didn't step in, they would just go away. Whether they turn to nonprofit or not remains to be seen. There's still a lot of for-profit papers out there, so I don't think it's a huge trend, but I'm sure it's out there.
We've worked with several outlets who are contemplating transitions, and I think one thing that's really important to mention is that you can operate a for-profit company at a deficit. So if there is a wealthy family operating, owning the paper, they can just have it be their pet project. That said, I think on the other side, converting to nonprofit, you still need a sustainable business model, right? Being a nonprofit doesn't mean that you can run deficits consistently, and so I think it just remains to be seen whether that transition, whether the bet they're making on converting to nonprofits is going to be sustainable over the long run. And I don't know that anyone knows.
We always say in the nonprofit news business that nonprofit is not a business model, right? It's just a tax exemption. But I think there are a few really great things about people moving toward nonprofit, even just being more friendly about nonprofit, accepting, public dollars, things like that. Because one of the pillars, for instance, we're a member of the Institute for Nonprofit News. One of the pillars of nonprofit newsrooms is sharing content. The idea is getting as much information into as many hands as possible. It's the greater good, right? But it also lends to this transparency that we've never had in the news industry before. As journalists, we are asking people to trust us to tell their stories. We're asking people to get their information that they're using to make daily life decisions. So I think it's fair for us to be transparent about how we're doing our jobs, why we're covering something, where our funding comes from. And with the nonprofit news, I really like that it belongs to the community. It's not my business, it's the community's business. We have a community advisory board. People in the community who love our mission and who give us these perspectives that we maybe wouldn't be privy to. Our readers guide our coverage. We give them internal newsroom updates so they feel like this is their newsroom, and it really is. It actually is.
You know, the one thing I would caution someone considering making the move from for-profit to nonprofit is I would warn against the assumption that being a nonprofit means you get to operate on the cheap. That is not the case. We are not a bunch of volunteers here. We are professional journalists. We are professional development people. We are professional finance people. We're professionals, and we do a job that we take great pride in. And I think one thing that has shifted in the nonprofit news, at least in the public media sphere, that I'm a part of since I've been a part of it over the past few decades, is a sense that we need to pay people what they're worth. And, you know, just because someone works for a nonprofit news organization doesn't mean they should be paid a fraction of what their peers in commercial news are paid. And we did a big salary adjustment a couple of years ago, and that costs money, but it is part of our mission to be a model workplace. And I think that's part of the responsibility that we take on as a nonprofit as well. So I would just caution against that. And then if I could just pivot, Mark, there are a couple of really interesting questions in the Q&A about ethics and propaganda and objectivity that if you want to go there, we could go there.
So let's do this. I'm going to bring Nicole back, and she is the steward of the questions. So I'll let her take that from you, and we can go to questions now.
Yeah, you hit on that, Judith. I was going to ask, kind of bring that into the conversation, especially for the organizations that are structured as nonprofits. It was touched on the concept where you have, you know, a donor that is giving to, let's say, an arts organization, and how much that organization might feel obligated to cater to the donor's interests and needs. So where does that come into play in terms of being a nonprofit and getting support, and how individuals might feel like that could influence the delivery of the information and that ethics piece that you brought up?
Yeah, so I think this is really, really important, and it's something I feel very passionately about as a journalist. So we have a very strong firewall policy, and for people who don't know what the firewall is, it means money doesn't influence editorial. Money doesn't influence coverage. I don't influence the editorial content of that my newsroom puts out. And that's really weird, having run the newsroom here, but it's for good purpose. It's because I'm one of the ones that goes out and fundraises and talks to philanthropists. If I care a lot about coverage of Alzheimer's and you care a lot about coverage of diabetes, well, I shouldn't be able to have any more influence over that because I give more money than you do. There is a big, bold, bright line between the funding and the editorial decision making, and that's written down in our ethics policy. It is reinforced in every meeting we have, whether it's internally or whether it's a conversation with a donor. And, you know, I've had those conversations with donors where, you know, they might be used to giving to an organization where they have more influence over the programming. And the conversation that we have is about the fact that what you are investing in here is independent, trustworthy journalism. And that is a public good for all the reasons that we discussed earlier. So you have to be very, very careful about that. And you have to be transparent about it on the front end. And usually when you are, there's no problem.
I think that's also the case for the private sector folks in the room.
Yeah, I was going to say that firewall exists for us too. Advertisers can't influence the newsroom.
Absolutely. Yeah.
I want to build on that from a hyper-local point of view as well, because, you know, with Judith was saying is that, you know, she's not involved in the editorial, she's more involved with the fundraising, but whenever you have a very small staff, that's a little harder to do. You have limited, you know, capacity. So you do have to have, like you said, that firewall. It has to be written down. It has to be extremely clear, and just transparency.
One thing we did a couple of years ago is we joined the Trust Project, and I don't know if anyone else is, you know, there are a number of third-party sort of certifiers for news organizations now. But for us, they set the standards for our wall and for our levels of transparency. And it's been great for us because we can go to people who support public news service and say, this is it. This is not, we might want to work with you more closely, but even if we did, which we don't, we can't because we need to meet these guidelines. And ultimately that's what builds, as a newswire, that's what builds the trust with the outlets that we're submitting to. And so that's been a really, really useful tool for us to maintain that wall.
Great. We have also on this call nonprofits that are attending, and when you talk about organizations that are working very closely with people who may be experiencing, different types of crises, or have the ability to be a valuable resource, I think one of the places that nonprofits oftentimes don't know how do they intersect with different journalists, different media outlets, to be a valuable content provider and information resource, and also share the things that are happening. I know I sat in a position one time having a conversation with a media group, and they said, we only cover hardcore news. So, the breaking news, and not certain how to be the appropriate source. So what would be kind of your guidance to those nonprofits that are listening in terms of how they could best be that resource and engage and how they should go about that?
I have a very strong feeling about this, having kind of come from the sector. And I just want to say to all the nonprofits on the call, especially since we just talked about our firewall, don't be afraid to fiercely advocate for yourself with journalists. You have stories to tell. The people you work with have stories to tell. Those stories often are not told at all. And if they are told, they're told very superficially. And it is incumbent upon you to be the fierce advocate for the work that you do. And if a journalist feels like you're violating a line, it's on them to tell you that. But you really do need to be passionate advocates for yourself in the media, because it just is a very competitive marketplace. The number of people out there pitching stories to us every day on stuff that's maybe not as relevant to the communities or stuff that we wouldn't necessarily want to cover, but we are, journalists are on deadline. Journalists have limited resources. Sometimes it's easier to take the thing that is easy to write about. If you're not one of the louder voices, it's not on purpose, but it just is, it's the natural way of things. If you're not a fierce advocate for your work, sometimes it will get drowned out.
Yeah, I would say for us, take a look at the staff list, figure out which reporter best aligns with your nonprofit. It might be the county reporter, and make that pitch to the reporter. Please don't make it to me. I get 100 emails a day. Oh, more than that, 100 emails like every 3 hours. So it's really hard for me to sort through everything. I would say start at the reporter level. They have a lot of discretion about stories that they choose. And if that doesn't work, go to the edit, look at the staff list and go to the Metro editor and make that pitch.
I'll qualify what I just said by saying be fierce, but also be smart about it. I don't want those emails either.
My best advice is ask yourself, why now? Why should we be paying attention to this story now? I got a lot of pitches about I called them there's this cool thing pitch. And I got those from reporters too, not just from organizations. If you've got a program that's been running for 20 years, why does the community specifically need to know about that right now? Is there something new about it? Is there something new going on in our community that makes your program particularly relevant? And that's going to help you rise above that noise. So that's the advice I always give folks when they ask about, how to pitch.
For me, it would be the email. If you want to get to that, great, but you will always, 9 times out of 10, just send me a DM on social media, not on my personal page, because sometimes we'll cross that line and I'm like, dude, I can't, I can't, or send me a friend request, but all of my social media for the most part is a public page, Instagram, Facebook, Twitter. So just send me a DM. And then be very quick, like Joshua said, and Judith and Megan and Julie and everybody else, if you've been around for 20 years, it's like, the dog that's 28 years old is now going to escort that 100-year-old woman. I'm like, okay, now that you got my attention, just give that to me in the first line or two. And then feel free to call our assignment desk, 407-513-1323. Oh, that's my desk line. Don't call that. I won't answer. 407-513-1313. And then somebody, it's Lewis, it's Shannon, and we all talk. We're all literally just sitting like an arm's away from each other. But social media is the best way for me. And then you can try an email, but it's like a few hundred a day.
Yeah.
And for me, I would just say if it's impacting our, we serve such a small community, if it's impacting our community members, definitely reach out. We love to get the word out about nonprofit work.
Great. Thank you all. I know that we've hit our time and we may not have been able to address every single question, but you guys had a lot of great insight and information, so we appreciate your time. We look forward to our future continued series on the role of philanthropy in ... So keep an eye out for more to come. And thank you all again for being here today.